As his rule collapsed, Nero cowered in his palace, desperately trying to think of any way to escape. He finally fell asleep from exhaustion, but when he awoke, he made an utterly disturbing discovery. Nero is known as the Mad Emperor of Rome, but he was so much more unhinged than most people even realize. Nero's great-great-grandfather was Augustus, the first emperor of Rome and one of the most legendary figures in history. Unfortunately, he was also related to his crazed uncle Caligula. But his most important relative, the one who would shape his life more than any other, was his infamous mother, Caligula's sister, Agrippina the Younger. Most women held little power in ancient Rome, but not Agrippina. She fiercely protected her son Nero and stings for him tirelessly behind the scenes. Whether he liked it or not, Nero owed pretty much everything he ever got to his mother. When Nero was only 3 years old, his father died, and his mother and sisters were exiled to a remote island in the Mediterranean. Agrippina had allegedly been plotting to overthrow Caligula, but her scheme was uncovered, and the Senate banished her. Nero lost everything in the aftermath of his mother's treachery. The Senate claimed his entire inheritance and sent him off to live with his aunt. He was just a boy, and already his mother's meddling was causing problems for him, but a death in the family would soon present a new opportunity, and Nero's mother took it. Nero's uncle Caligula can only be described as deranged. His rule was cut short when his own guards cornered the infamous emperor in the halls of his palace, stabbed him, and put an end to his reign of terror. A change in emperors meant new opportunities for the exiled Agrippina. She seduced Claudius, the new emperor, and married him. She knew she could never rule Rome herself, but she could put her son Nero on the throne and rule from the shadows. But was Nero up to the task? Nero was now 14 years old and ready to enter public life. He began giving speeches and married Claudius's daughter Octavia, technically his stepsister, at 16. It seemed like he was a great candidate to become the next emperor, and Claudius named him his heir, if only anyone could have seen through this good boy act. Claudius died in 54 AD, but his death raised some eyebrows. Anyone who really knew what was going on in Rome knew who was responsible for Claudius's death: his wife, Agrippina the Younger. Why? Well, Claudius had started to turn against Nero, and was even considering cutting him out of the line of succession, and Agrippina wasn't about to let that happen. After Claudius's death, Nero became the emperor of Rome in 54 AD. He was only 16 years old. Nero had all the power in the world now, and he quickly started to screw everything up. First, he started several construction projects that were ridiculously extravagant and way too expensive. He nearly bankrupted the empire. Romans were starting to get fed up with the young emperor, and his mother was not making things easier for him. Agrippina planned to rule Rome through her son. She allegedly killed Nero's aunt, the woman who raised him while she was in exile, and several other people close to her son. Soon, Nero was taking a page out of his mother's book. Claudius' son Britannicus was a potential threat to Nero's rule, so he decided to eliminate him. The boy was only 14 years old. Nero's first attempt to poison him failed, so he tried again. This time it worked, and Britannicus was dead. It became obvious Agrippina and her son were the two most dangerous people in Rome, and soon they would be at odds with each other. The fallout would be brutal. Agrippina must have been pleased that her son was finally emperor, like she had planned. That is, until Nero started replacing his mother's allies in the Senate. He rightfully thought she was getting too powerful for her own good. Agrippina was furious, but his next move would upset more than just his mother. Nero took a slave girl, Claudia Actae, as one of his first mistresses, causing scandal throughout Rome. Agrippina told him to break it off, but he ignored her and carried on his debauchery affair. He'd only been emperor for a few years, but his true nature was beginning to reveal itself. When Nero realized that Agrippina had started plotting against him with his wife, he exiled his own mother from the palace. Despite all his scheming, Rome actually loved Nero at first. He reformed taxes, improved conditions for slaves, and generally made life better for the people. After suffering under the psychotic Caligula and the weak-willed Claudius, Romans were thrilled to finally have a strong emperor. But all that praise was inflating his ego to godlike proportions. Next, Nero decided to start an affair with the beautiful and cunning Poppaea Sabina, who just so happened to be married to one of Rome's most powerful men. Nero kept the affair quiet, but there were some who were just waiting for the right moment to use it against him. Agrippina heard about the affair and outed the adulterous couple to everyone in Rome. For Nero, this was the final straw. Nero sent his agents to take Agrippina on what would be her final voyage. The plan? Sail out, sink the ship, and let the sea do the rest. When the ship went down, Agrippina somehow swam back to shore, but Nero's man was waiting for her. And this time, he made sure the job was done. Nero had just murdered his own mother, and her death was a turning point. From here on out, there were no more moments of respect or admiration, only chaos. There was one person who was almost as happy as Nero to see Agrippina gone, Nero's lover Poppaea, and she had a plan. Nero and his wife Octavia had been married for 8 years, but they hadn't produced any little emperors or empresses. Poppaea pushed Nero to leave his wife and marry her. Truth be told, Nero didn't need too much pushing. He claimed Octavia was barren and unceremoniously divorced her. But what he did next was truly scandalous. Nero married Poppaea just 12 days after his divorce, and their marriage would be as scandalous as its beginning. Nero and Poppaea welcomed a daughter, Claudia Augusta, in 63 AD. Tragically, little Claudia passed at just 4 months old. The heartbroken couple mourned their terrible loss, but Nero didn't stay down in the dumps for too long. Convinced he was a brilliant athlete and artist, Nero entered the Olympics, and would you know it, he won every single contest he entered. He even won a chariot race, in which he was thrown from his chariot and didn't finish. As Nero spiraled further into madness, fewer and fewer people were left to challenge him, and that was bad news for both him and Rome. One of the last voices of reason was his advisor, Burrus. So when Burrus died, things took a dark turn. Nero went on a killing spree, executing rivals left and right with barely an excuse. Before he had at least pretended to cooperate with the Senate, not anymore, Rome was about to get even more dangerous. During the Saturnalia festival, Nero married Pythagoras, a freedman. During the ceremony, Nero took on the role of the bride, complete with a veil. Even by Roman standards, this was next-level bizarre. But while Nero was busy with weddings and wild parties, the empire was about to face its greatest catastrophe yet. The image of Nero playing the fiddle while Rome burns is one of the most infamous things about him. But is it true? Maybe. Nero did fancy himself a musician, and in 64 AD, a terrible fire did break out and quickly consumed the city. Before long, Rome was an inferno. The city burned for 7 days straight. By the end, 3 districts were reduced to ashes, and 7 more were severely damaged. Rome needed a strong leader to rebuild, but all it had was Nero. And then the rumors started. The Great Fire could have been an accident. Rome was full of wooden buildings, but if it wasn't an accident, who had the most to gain? The whispers all pointed to one man, an emperor slipping further and further into madness. That's right, Nero became the prime suspect for burning down his own city. And honestly, there's a pretty good case for it. Nero wanted a palace as extravagant as his own taste, but there was one problem. There simply was no more space for anything new in the city. That is, until the fire. Suddenly, Nero had all the space he needed. To be fair, he did organize relief efforts, but that didn't stop him from breaking ground on his dream project, the Golden House. The palace featured massive artificial landscapes and a 30-foot statue of Nero himself. Whether he started the fire or not, the optics were terrible. So to shift the blame, Nero did what emperors do best. He found a scapegoat. According to the historian Tacitus, Nero pinned the fire on the Christians. Despite having zero evidence, their punishments were beyond brutal. He rounded up the Christians and executed them in the most horrific ways possible. They were thrown to wild animals, crucified or burned alive. Tacitus even suggested that Nero enjoyed this excessive cruel team. After the fire, Nero started rebuilding Rome and building his golden house naturally. But the cost was astronomical. To fund the build, he hiked taxes, squeezed the provinces for tribute, and devalued Roman currency. It was a recipe for disaster, and Rome was furious. This time, the Romans were ready to act. In 65 AD, a group of Roman statesmen decided enough was enough. Their plan? Eliminate Nero and restore the Republic. Augustus had been a solid emperor, sure. But after Caligula and now Nero, people were starting to think that this whole all-powerful emperor idea might not be for them. This realization meant one thing: the Romans were coming for their mad emperor. A freedman loyal to Nero discovered the plot on his life and reported it before the traitors could put their plan into motion. Nero's response was swift and brutal. He had each of the men involved executed, but the worst punishment went to one of Nero's one-time advisors, Seneca. Someone accused Seneca of taking part in the plot, something he desperately denied. But there was no mercy left in Nero, just cruelty, so he condemned his old friend to a disturbing end. Seneca had fallen out of favor, and Nero didn't need him around anymore. While he didn't have Seneca executed, he did force him to commit suicide. So same difference. No one was safe around Nero anymore, not even his own wife. Behind closed doors, the marriage was falling apart. It would take a truly special kind of woman to put up with Nero, and Poppaea didn't have it in her. They fought constantly, and fighting with Nero was never a good idea. Even though she became pregnant with their second child, their relationship would not survive for much longer. What followed was one of the most disturbing acts of Nero's entire life, and that is saying something. Poppaea died suddenly in 65 AD while pregnant with Nero's second child. According to historians, she and Nero had been fighting over how much time he spent at the chariot races. Nero flew into a rage and viciously kicked her in the abdomen. She went into labor, and neither she nor the child survived. After Poppaea's passing, Nero went into an extremely public period of mourning. He gave her a luxurious funeral, bestowed her with divine honors, and planned to build a temple for her. Maybe he felt guilty, maybe he was genuinely sad, or maybe he was just covering his tracks. Either way, what he did next to Poppaea's own son erased any goodwill he might have built. Nero invited the boy on a fun fishing trip, then drowned him before they made it back to shore. The bodies were starting to pile up, and yet, if anything, that only fueled Nero's bloodlust. But now, Nero was an emperor without an empress for about 5 minutes. Nero already had a mistress before Poppaea's tragic death. Her name was Statilia Messalina. There was just one tiny issue. Statilia was already married, but a husband could not stand in the way of what Nero wanted. Nero forced the unlucky man to commit suicide so he could marry his wife. Not long after marrying Statilia, Nero got married again, this time to a young boy, Sporus, who just so happened to look a lot like his ex, Poppaea. But Nero's obsession with the boy took a dark turn. Fueled by his confusing feelings about his sling wife, Nero had Sporus castrated, dressed him in a bridal veil, and then married him. This wasn't just some sick one-time stunt either. Once they were married, Nero brought Sporus along to public appearances, dressed as his wife, complete with the full regalia of a Roman empress. By this point, there wasn't a soul in Rome who didn't know that Nero was truly mad and had to be stopped. Nero realized he was in danger and decided to flee Rome for the eastern provinces, but what he didn't realize was that he was already out of time. When he ordered his officers to start making preparations for his escape, they didn't just refuse. They openly mocked him. That was when it hit Nero. He wasn't in control anymore. Desperate, Nero retreated to his palace, frantically trying to figure out his next move. And he drifted off to sleep. When he woke up, he called for his guards, but no one came. He sent messengers to his friends. Silence. Furious, he stormed out to find them himself, only to discover the palace was nearly empty. There was no one left. In his final hours, Nero wandered the palace, sobbing and begging for someone, anyone, to kill him before the mob came for him. But no one would even give him that mercy. Too afraid to take his own life, Nero had no choice but to run. At this point, the only people still loyal to him were former slaves. One of them, a freedman named Phaon, offered him a safe house, a modest villa just outside the city. With nowhere else to turn, Nero gathered a small group including 3 freedmen and spores. Then he fled for his life. Even in his downfall, he remained as dramatic as ever. He actually ordered his men to dig his own grave the moment they arrived. Before leaving the palace, Nero had had a lethal concoction prepared for him, just in case things got really bad. He carried the poison with him in a golden box, clinging to it like a lifeline. But now, faced with the moment of truth, he couldn't bring himself to drink it. And then it was too late. A messenger arrived at the villa with news. The Senate had declared him a public enemy. Worse still, they weren't just planning on executing him. They were going to beat him to death. They also knew where he was, and armed forces were on their way to the villa to apprehend him at that very moment. Nero now knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was finished, but he just couldn't bring himself to open that golden box. He paced back and forth, allegedly muttering the infamous phrase, "What an artist dies in me." Each time he came close to drinking the poison, he lost his nerve. According to reports, he begged one of his companions to take their own life first, to show him how it was done. Finally, when he heard the approaching horses, he turned to his secretary and begged him to do the deed. Nero's secretary ran him through with a sword, just as the Senate's horsemen rode up. The soldiers attempted to save his life so he could face justice back in Rome, but they were too late. Nero passed from this life, but the unhinged emperor wasn't done making a mess of the empire just yet. Nero's end left a power vacuum in Rome, leading to the bloody year of 4 emperors. There would be another year of pure chaos before Vespasian finally took the throne and brought order back to the empire. Nero may have been finished, but the chaos he created was just getting started.